Now it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker. Today's speaker is Dr. Majd Al-Harisias, an assistant professor of medicine in the Division of Cardiovascular Medicine at Vanderbilt University. Um, Dr. Majd graduated from the Imperial College London's Faculty of Medicine. Also, he finished and completed his internal medicine residency at Mayo Clinic, where he received both the Outstanding Achievement Award and the Best Senior Resident Educator Award. Following this, he completed his cardiology fellowship at Vanderbilt, serving as chief fellow, and he was repeatedly recognized with teaching awards from both faculty and trainees. He also completed a Master of Science in Clinical Investigations. Today, Dr. Majd will share insights not only from his clinical and academic journey, but also practical guidance on how to strategically build a CV that highlights what really matters as a medical student beyond grades only. So, Dr. Majd, please join us. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Ranim. Are you able to see my slides?
Yeah, they're perfectly clear.
Perfect. Okay. بداية أنا بس بدي أرحب فيكم وأشكركم على وجودكم معنا اليوم، وبدي أشكر رنيم والفريق اللي نسق هذا الويبينار اليوم، وأنا كتير فخور إني أكون موجود مع طلاب أردنيين متميزين زيكم، وإن شاء الله إنه أقدر أفيدكم اليوم بالويبينار. فبداية أنا بس رح أحكي شوي عن how to build a strong CV and what stands out from our perspective as people who are reviewing the CVs. وبعدين رح يكون عندنا questions and answers إن شاء الله. إذا أي حدا عنده أي أسئلة إن شاء الله بنجاوب الأسئلة اللي موجودة. فزي ما حكت رنيم، أنا تخرجت من كلية الطب ببريطانيا وعملت الريزيدنسي بالانترنال ميديسن بمايو كلينيك الحمد لله بين 2016 ل 2019. بعدين I was lucky enough بفضل من الله إنه to get accepted into cardiology fellowship at Vanderbilt, where I did my general cardiology fellowship and also electrophysiology fellowship, and also did a research fellowship with the American Heart Association and completed a master's degree with a full scholarship from Vanderbilt in clinical research. And I have started as an attending or a consultant in electrophysiology at Vanderbilt since August, so I've been in attending for about 4 months now. As part of my job, I also worked on the selection committee for a cardiology fellowship and electrophysiology fellowship. So I was involved in reviewing applications. I was also involved in interviewing candidates and listening in on the selection committee meetings. And so that gave me a lot of really good insight into what sort of things stand out when I'm reviewing applications. In addition, I also worked with different organizations where I mentored a number of medical students, and I reviewed applications, reviewed over 100 ERAS and personal statements. And so I was involved in editing those applications, so I have a pretty good idea as to what things stand out when it comes to the application. So بداية بس بدي أحكي عن differences between traditional CV والCV اللي بتقدم لما الواحد بيعمل الطلب تبع الإيراس أو الريزيدنسي. Traditional CV هو a document that summarizes the main points about your education and achievements. There is no set format for the traditional CV, meaning that you will see lots of different types of examples of CVs, and different people will have different formats of how the CV is done. And it's important to recognize that for a CV, it does not need to be artistic, meaning that there are a lot of people who have these very graphic CVs that have, you know, a lot of design things and things that make it look really beautiful and artistic and eye-catching. But in reality, it doesn't really need to be artistic. And what I've shown you here is a screenshot of my CV. So you can see that it's very plain. It just has the important details that you need to put across to anybody who's looking at your application or anything that you are applying for. There's a number of websites out there. All you have to do is on Google, do US Medical School CV template. And this is an example of a useful website, and we'll share these slides. And this website will have some examples of CV templates that you can use in order to put together a CV. It's important, whatever stage of medical school that you are at, to spend some time building a CV. So whenever you have, a free weekend, or, you're on break or something like that, take a little bit of time to build your CV, because it's a lot easier to add things to the CV than to actually build a CV from scratch if somebody asks you for your CV. The time that as a medical student you will need a traditional CV is when you are applying for electives and or research positions. So you're not going to submit a traditional CV when you are applying for residency. When you're applying for residency, you're going to use an ERAS application, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So you need to use this CV, a traditional CV document, when you're applying for example, your electives, or if you're applying for a research position in the US or in the UK or in a number of different countries around the world. They will ask you to submit a traditional CV. And I always tell people that even if you make your CV in Microsoft Word, always convert it to PDF when you send it to somebody, because it always looks a lot more professional when you submit it as a PDF. Traditionally, for the CV, you need to have brief but very clear descriptions of what you did in each role. And it's really important to emphasize this, because people in the US are not going to understand what different activities mean for somebody who's a medical student in Jordan. They may not understand, for example, what it means تكون الأول على الدفعة، أو إنه أنت دخلت طب تنافسي أو منحة، أو كل هالشغلات ممكن ما تكون كتير واضحة بالنسبة لهم. You have to have brief, clear descriptions of any type of society or activity that you did. And if it's something that you did repeatedly, for example, like you were involved in an activity once a week or once a month, mention that frequency if it's relevant. And these are just some examples from my CV. So you can see here that I was the co-organizer of our residency cardiology interest group. So I have a very brief description here, just one sentence, where I said that I organized monthly sessions with cardiologists, which included didactic lectures, journal club, board review questions, and career planning sessions. When I was in medical school, I was a tutor for our OSCE exams. And so once a week, I would tutor students who were 1 year younger than me in clinical examination skills to third-year medical students. So even just a brief example of this, because if you just write something like OSCE tutor, they may not necessarily know what that means. And so demonstrating the frequency of what you did for each activity is really important. And when you're applying for a research position, you may need to edit your CV slightly to highlight skills that would make you excel in a research position. So you may need to really emphasize in your CV prior involvement in research projects, any additional training that you did on research or statistics. So if you did any online courses, or if you attended webinars, or if you did any additional training that would help you with that research position, it's important to emphasize those skills in your CV. Similarly, if you have some additional skills that most medical students would not have, for example, let's say you did some training and you know how to use statistical analysis software programs like Stata or SAS or SPSS or whatever it is, it's important that if you do have those skills, to emphasize those skills in your traditional CV. So that is what the traditional CV is. Again, there's lots of templates that you can use to build on it. But for the rest of the talk, what I'm going to do is I'm going to emphasize the ERAS or residency CV and the different components of the residency CV. And the reason why this is really important to know now, regardless of what stage you are in medical school, is because you don't want to be in a position where 1 month before, or as you're starting to submit your application, تصير تحكي يا ريت انه شاركت بهذا الاكتيفيتي، او ما كنت عارف او ما كنت عارفه انه هدول الاكتيفيتيز ممكن ياثروا بالسي في. فكتير مهم وانتم هلا بالميديكال سكول تعرفوا which activities are really important and which activities are going to help you stand out, which I think is the whole purpose of this seminar. So when you are submitting your residency application for residency in the US, or your ERAS application, you basically fill out sections of an online application like this, and this will automatically generate a CV. Meaning you don't have to submit a separate CV. When you submit each aspect of these different sections of the electronic application, تلقائيا هو راح يعمل CV وراح يتم تقديم هذا الCV للresidency programs. So you do not need to submit a separate CV when you are applying for residency positions. And it is important, as I mentioned, to familiarize yourself with the components of the application early. And this is a link as well which has very detailed information on each of these sections. So again, when you have some free time, it's a good idea to just spend a little bit of time reading through these sections so that you can understand what things are valuable for residency application. These elements here, your personal information, your biographical information, your education, these are things that you can't really change very much. Things like, you know, your date of birth, what medical school you're in, etc. But the things that are really going to help you stand out and the things that you can work on, والأشياء اللي بتقدروا تغيروها هي الexperience والpublications. These are the things that you can really work on as a medical student. Okay, and so those are the two sections that I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining what the different things that you can do as a medical student are to help you stand out. So again, with your personal information, these are things that for the most part, you really can't change. Things like your name, your address, your phone number, your visa, citizenship status. Those are just some personal information things that you can't change. The only thing that you can work on, but they don't really matter a huge amount, is that if you have done additional certifications, so CPR certifications, basic life support, advanced cardiac life support through the American Heart Association, you can include these. There is a section in the personal information section where you can include them. But if you don't have the opportunity to do them, I wouldn't stress out too much, because when you get accepted for residency, they will automatically enroll everyone in a BLS, ACLS class, and you need to do them. Even for me, I need to get them recertified every 2 years. And so this is something that the hospital will automatically do. So if you've done them, or if you have an opportunity to do them in Jordan, that's great. But if you don't have that opportunity, don't worry about it too much. The next section is the biographical information. These are things like what languages you speak fluently. And these are other things that, again, are not going to make a huge difference. It asks you to include something called the geographical preferences, which basically means which area of the US do you prefer to live or work in. This can include reasons, the reasons why you can edit this. For example, if you have family in a particular area of the US, or friends, or certain areas of the US tend to be more friendly for IMGs. For example, in the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, Chicago, in the Midwest, those sorts of areas, you can include them as geographical preferences. And then practice setting preferences. Do you prefer to live in a small town? Do you prefer to live in a big city? Those sorts of things, you know, it's not really related to what experiences you've done. This is more your preference of where you want to do residency. The education section, this section, again, there's not a lot that you can do here to really improve your CV. It includes things like the name of your medical school. Additional degrees you can also include here, but this usually doesn't apply to international students. This usually applies more to American students, who usually will do a bachelor's degree, and then sometimes they will do a master's degree or a PhD before they get into medical school. So for most Jordanian medical students, this additional degree section doesn't apply, since most people will have gone to medical school straight from secondary school or high school. So, but the thing that you can include, if this applies to you, is honors and awards in medical school. And it's important, again, to assume that the people who are reviewing your application don't understand what this honor means. So for example, sometimes I will see things when I'm reviewing CVs and it'll say performance award for physiology or something like that. And I don't know what that means. But if you, for example, إذا أنت كنت من العشرة الأوائل على الدفعة, you can say I was the top student in the final year ranking out of 500 students, out of 400 students. If you can explain to them, again, because the medical school classes in Jordan tend to be bigger than medical school classes in the US, and it's a lot more impressive when you are the top student out of 500 students compared to if you are the top student out of 50 students. And so anything that you can do to add additional detail to explain what that honor or what that award means, it is always helpful, because you just need to assume that these people are reviewing applications from medical schools all over the world. I will sometimes review applications from students who are from India or Pakistan or somewhere, and it'll say things like Physiology Achievement Award, and I have no idea what that means. And so again, just take the time, just very briefly, to explain what each of these honors and awards means. And then the experience section, this is where you can really excel and really stand out. And I'm going to give some concrete examples of things that you can include. here, you can describe up to 10 experiences, and this is really important to understand. There's a maximum of 10 experiences that you can include. Previously, when I was applying for residency, there was no maximum, and people were including like hundreds of experiences. So every time, you know, they did like a volunteer role for 1 hour, they would include it as an experience. And what that meant was all these applications were hundreds of pages long, and it was really hard to figure out what exactly people did and, you know, how much they contributed to certain things. So you may have more than 10 experiences, but you want to be strategic and pick the 10 experiences that are going to be most impressive when you are applying for residency. When you are describing these 10 experiences, you need to also include a short description of what you did in that experience. And I'm going to show you some examples of that and what you learned from that experience. And again, I'm going to show you some examples of that. And it's important to specify the frequency. So is it something that, for example, you volunteered once and that's it? Or is it something that, for example, you organized a cardiology interest group session once a month for 2 years? Is it something that you did daily? Is it something that you did weekly? Is it something that you did every day for 3 months? You know, specifying the frequency is really, really, really important. And also, they will ask you to specify 3 experiences as your most meaningful experiences. And so you need to think about which of your 10 experiences, what are the top 3 experiences that are most meaningful to you as well. So these are examples of the experience type, and this is a screenshot from the ERAS website. And so it's exactly what they want you to include. So these include things, so from your 10 experiences, you can include things like education training. So these include elective rotations that you do in the US or abroad or even in Jordan, but that also includes your intern years. So Sent al-Imtiyaz bil Urdun will also be an experience type here, or if you started residency in Jordan, that is an experience that you will include here. Any type of professional organization. So for example, if you are involved in the IFMSA, if you are involved in, for example, there are some medical students from the University of Jordan who are involved in the American College of Cardiology medical student section. This is where you can include that. Any other extracurricular activities. So for example, if you are involved in the cardiology interest group in Jordan at your medical school, are you, for example, student council president at your medical school? This is where you would include those things. Any type of teaching experience, if you worked as a teaching assistant, this is where you would include that here. Any type of research, even if you just did research as a medical student, or if you went on to have a formal research job for a year or 2 after medical school as you were applying for residency, this is where you would include it here. And then also any type of volunteer work here. Did you volunteer with a refugee camp in Jordan or with King Hussein Cancer Foundation or whatever it is? This is where you would include that volunteer experience. So these are the types of experiences. So again, from all these experiences, you need to pick 10 experiences that are going to be the most impressive when you are applying for residency. Okay. And then the publication section is the other thing that you can work on. So this will include published manuscripts, but it will also include any type of abstracts or poster presentations that you presented at conferences. So it doesn't have to be a full paper published manuscript. Even abstracts or poster presentations can be included in this application here. And the other important thing here is that you can include papers that are completed and submitted, but are still being reviewed by a journal, even if they're not fully accepted. So it doesn't have to be fully accepted, fully published for you to be able to include this in the publication section. So what are some experiences that you can do as a medical student in Jordan in order to enhance your application and to make your application stand out as much as possible? Elective rotations in the US are really, really, really important. And I know that elective rotations have become harder to do now with visa restrictions. And I know that they've been harder after COVID as well. But whatever you can do to do an elective rotation in the US, at least 1 month, ideally 2 months in the US, that will really, really, really enhance your application more than anything. As you're looking for electives, doing a hands-on elective rotation is always better than doing an observership for reasons that we can talk about in the Q&A. But if at all possible, the elective rotation is really, really, really going to help you as much as possible with your application. Involvement, as I mentioned, in local, regional, or international organizations. So interest group at your university, research interest groups is helpful. Attending conferences, being involved in IFMSA. If, for example, if you are interested in cardiology and you will get involved in the American College of Cardiology International Medical Students section, there are a number of things, and I know that medical students from Jordan have been involved in those things. So those are things that you can do. Volunteer work, again, I've heard of medical students in Jordan getting involved in things like Operation Smile, King Hussein Cancer Foundation, refugee camps, all those things. Any type of volunteer work is helpful. Teaching experience, whether it's formally as a teaching assistant, or if, for example, you just organize some teaching sessions on the weekend for medical students who are below you, who are younger than you, to help them through certain exams, or for the USMLE or whatever it is, those sorts of things can matter. And then research, there's a number of research things that you can get involved in. I get emails pretty much every single day from students around the world asking to get involved in research. And unfortunately, I wish I can say yes to everybody, but it is really, really challenging to do that. And a lot of the research that some doctors will do, like the research that I might do, may be related to chart review, where you need to have access to our medical system in order to be able to review the charts and kind of extract the clinical information from the charts. But sometimes, we do have opportunities to get students involved in systematic reviews or meta-analyses, or in like the write-up or the statistical analysis section of a paper. So, we try our best to include people, and there is, and I'll mention some resources at the end as well, but I know a number of students have been very successful in Jordan in publishing systematic reviews and meta-analyses, but also case reports or case series. So if you come across a case report or an interesting number of cases as well. Educational research. So for example, what they're doing here, where you do a survey, you do a session, and then you do a post-survey about doing interest groups or things like that for different initiatives, educational initiatives for medical students. That can be a relatively easy type of research to get involved in. Even things like surveys or patient education, for example, handing out a survey in a clinic waiting room. I've done that type of research in medical school, and then having them see the doctor and then doing a post survey talking about, what sort of things they liked from the encounter, what sort of things they didn't like, that sort of thing can be helpful. And even just like retrospective clinical studies, for example, what is the experience in Jordan in treating condition X or condition Y, or what is the experience, people have been have been great in terms of publishing that sort of experience in Jordan as well. It's important when you are submitting your ERAS application that each of the experiences that you are describing, that you include clear, detailed descriptions of what you did in that experience. So each experience on ERAS allows you to include a description with a character limit of 750 characters. So each letter or space is one character. So that means that's approximately 120 ل 150 كلمة. And what I always tell people is that the advice that I give is that when you are describing that experience, there's 3 elements that you need to include in that description. You need to include a brief description of the experience. You need to include your specific role, so what you specifically did. And you also need to include what you learned or what you gained from that experience. So those 3 things are things that you have to include. So for example, I've seen people who submit applications that will say something like, I completed a 4-week elective rotation in cardiology in Miami. This was an example of a real application. So you have up to 120 to 150 words to describe what you gained from that experience. I have no idea as somebody reviewing the application, ما عندي ولا أي فكرة أنت إيش عملت بهاي الإلكتيف. هل أنت شاركت بالإلكتيف؟ هل أنت عملت إشي استفدت تعلمت؟ ولا أنت بس مثلا كنت on paper داومت ساعة باليوم وروحت؟ I have no idea what you did in that elective. But a good example is, again, I like to use bullet points, but to say something like this: I completed a 4-week hands-on elective rotation with inpatient and outpatient cardiology in Miami. I obtained histories, conducted physical exams, and presented my findings daily, including management plans, because it shows that you were thinking about the management, to the cardiologist. I also charted in the electronic medical record and placed orders. This, again, number 2, what you gained from the experience. This rotation significantly improved my knowledge of outpatient cardiology management, inpatient acute coronary syndrome and arrhythmia management, and ECG interpretation. I participated in performing basic echo and learned about interpretation, and I observed electrophysiology procedures and learned the basics of central venous access. So you can see that from this is an example of how you demonstrate what you did, what you gained from the experience, and what you specifically did. So this is how clear, detailed descriptions are so important in describing what you did in each of your experiences. Another example, I was involved in a meta-analysis on smoking cessation clinics in the Middle East. This is, I just made this up, okay? Like somebody did a meta-analysis on the utility of smoking cessation clinics in the Middle East. Again, I have no idea what you did in the meta-analysis. Like, did your friend just add your name as a co-author to that paper? Or did you actively, read papers and screen papers and learn? I have no idea what you did. But a good example is, again, just very clear bullet points in about 100 words. I participated in a meta-analysis on smoking cessation clinics in the Middle East. What your role was, my role included screening initial articles for review, so over 1,000 articles, so that shows them that you're dedicated. You extracted data from selected articles, and you participated in manuscript writing and editing. I gained experience in performing a meta-analysis, including statistical analysis and manuscript writing. I was able to apply the skills that I learned from a meta-analysis webinar I had previously attended. So this shows what you learned from the experience and that you're able to apply knowledge and information that you gained from a different setting. And then also tell me about the outcome. This paper has been submitted to Journal X and is currently under review. So again, this paper hasn't been published yet, but from this very brief description, as somebody who's reviewing your application, I can see what you've done and what you've gained from the experience, even if the paper hasn't been published yet. But this means so much more to me as somebody reviewing the application than saying something like, I was involved in a meta-analysis, or just seeing a list of your publications in your ERAS application. So how can you stand out as a medical student? What sort of things stand out when I'm reviewing medical students? Let's say I'm reviewing applications from 100 medical students from Jordan. What are some things that will stand out? As you all know, step 1 is now pass-fail, but doing well on step 2 CK can help you stand out from the crowd. Medical school honors and awards, if those apply to you, again, stand out. If you were من العشر الأوائل بالmedical school, that doesn't mean that you have to be, but if you were, or إذا أنت كنت مثلا من كثير مرات بشوف ناس بكتبوا إنهم كانوا من 10 أوائل على المملكة بالتوجيهي, those sort of things matter. But again, explain to me what the توجيهي exam is. That you were, in the top 10 students in the country out of over 100,000 students, like you have to explain what that essentially means. US clinical experience. So again, your elective or your sub-internship is much better than an observership with a strong letter of recommendation. It's really important in order to stand out to have a strong letter of recommendation. Involvement in research, especially if your goal is to go to a university-based program. So this is where joining things like the JAPA group, or there's an American Association, Arab American Society of Cardiology. They have a WhatsApp group with over 300 members. Currently, they're working on kind of streamlining a research initiative to help medical students get involved in research. And so if you're not a member of those groups, it's free to join those groups. So it's an easy thing to do. Importantly, the things that really stand out to me is when you are a leader and not just a follower or participant. So for example, when you say something like, I created a program to start a cardiology interest group at medical school in Jordan, or I created a volunteer experience for this with this type of society or organization, and I organized this, as opposed to أنا رحت شاركت مرة بالرefugee camp وروحت, So trying to do something where you start something, again, you don't have to do this, but try to think about ways where you can be a leader or someone who starts something and not just somebody who participates in something. So if you can do that, those sort of things help you stand out on your application. Frequent participation in activities reflects dedication and stands out more to me than a one-time participation. So you volunteering with an organization regularly for 2 years reflects much more dedication and it stands out much more on an application than you just going once for 1 hour and then going home. Okay, so those sorts of things really, really, really matter. And then, if possible, having a variety of experiences is helpful. So from your 10 experiences, you don't want all 10 experiences to be just clinical experiences. You don't want all 10 experiences to be research experiences and never to do any type of electives or clinical experiences. So of the 10 experiences, try to have a mix of teaching, research, clinical, volunteer work. Those sorts of things will help you stand out when you're applying for residency. So on the flip side, what sort of things will help you stand out for the wrong reasons? So incomplete applications or minimal details, having spelling or grammar mistakes. So have multiple people proofread your application and personal statement. This is an example of an ERAS application that somebody actually submitted that I reviewed. You can see there's so many spelling mistakes. It doesn't have information. There's so many grammar mistakes. And I honestly was shocked that somebody even submitted this for residency application. So these are just some things. And like now this is an example that I include in a presentation. So you don't want to be that example. Also lying or exaggerating experiences as well. It is very easy to tell, believe it or not, when somebody is lying or exaggerating a type of experience. And so those things are important. The final thing, hobbies and interests. You also have up to 300 characters to provide details about your hobbies and interests. And these are just things outside of medicine. And they don't have to be anything crazy or groundbreaking. You don't have to be an Olympic athlete. You don't have to be anything insane for that. But don't leave this section blank. This is what helps residency programs know that you're a normal human being. So, you know, if you like to go to the gym, if you like to cook, if you like to, you know, go for walks or hikes or even read or whatever it is that you like to do, even those sorts of things, those are kind of the things that, you know, on my application, I said, you know, I like to try different restaurants. I like to go to the gym. I like to hang out with friends. I like to read. I like to hike, you know, so I didn't do anything. I don't have any hobbies or interests that are like really amazing or very, very super exciting. But again, it just shows people that you have interests outside of medicine. If you like to draw, if you like to do art, if you like to do music or whatever it is that you like to do, don't leave this section blank, because this is how they have a conversation with you in the interview. They'll be like, oh, I see you like to read, you know, tell me about the last book you read, or I see you like to draw, you know, what type of drawings do you like to do? You know, and it kind of breaks the ice and it makes the conversation a little bit easier to have, okay? So the road to residency and fellowship in the US is a very long but very rewarding road. Because this is for the cardiology interest group, I understand that not everybody is going to go into cardiology, but just be aware that cardiology and GI fellowships are the most competitive fellowships for internal medicine residents. For residents, they have about a 60% match rate, but it's higher if you're at an academic or university-based program, so you want to aim for those if you can. And so what that means is that the hard work doesn't stop. Even when you get into residency, you still have to work on research and on enhancing your CV. So this is something that you will continue to do, but it is very rewarding. As an attending, as somebody who's now completed that road, it is super rewarding. I love what I do. I love being an electrophysiologist, helping patients, seeing patients in clinic, doing procedures, teaching. I love doing research. It is an amazing job, and it is very long road, but very, very, very rewarding. And sometimes it's hard to see that light at the end of the tunnel when you're still in medical school. So I'm going to pause there and open it up for any types of questions or discussions. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Majd. بالمناسبة دكتور ماجد ما شاء الله عنه، يعني احنا كثير محظوظين اليوم انه عم بيعطينا الويبينار. ما بعرف اذا يعني جزء منكم اكيد مهتم بطريق US، ودكتور مجد كان يعمل collaboration مع اسماء كثير كبيرة وبروجرامز كتير كبار مثل The Match Guy، يعني أكثر الناس اللي بدهم يتعلموا عن الماتش والCVs والpersonal statements and how to do all these things. فدكتور ماجد is their first top choice. فإحنا جدا محظوظين إنه اليوم أصلا يعني قاعدة عم تعطي لطلاب بالجامعة الأردنية، وحتى مش بس بالجامعة الأردنية، في كتير جامعات معنا اليوم، من البلقة، من الهاشمية، تكنو، مؤتة كمان. فإحنا محظوظين فيك كثير. شكرا لك دكتور. هلأ أي حدا بده سؤال رح ناخد يعني بعض الأسئلة، واللي بده يسأل بس يرفع إيده على التيمز ورح ناخد الأسئلة.
ثانك يو. كمان بس كنت بدي احكي انه في موجودين، انا كنت عامل سيشنز على يوتيوب موجودين فور فري على الانترفيو والريزيدنسي ابلكيشنز والايراس والبيرسونال ستيتمنت، فاي حدا مهتم في هدول الفيديوز موجودين كمان على اليوتيوب فور فري.
عبد الله تفضل.
أول شيء يعطيك العافية يا دكتور. ثاني شيء عندي سؤالين بخصوص سي في. إذا حطينا بالسي في إنه إحنا فيرست جنريشن دكتور، هذا الشيء ممكن يفيد. الشيء الثاني هو موضوع خاص بالنسبة لي، اللي هو إنه أنا قبل ما أكون طالب طب كنت طالب صيدلة، بعديها حولت طب. أثناء فترتي في كلية الصيدلة عندي شهادة تدريب صيدلاني لمدة 500 ساعة في الصيدليات. هل هذا الشيء لو حطيته في الإكسبيرينسز ممكن يفيدني بالسي في؟
اكيد. اول شيء بالنسبه للفيرست جنريشن، عاده هم هذا الشيء بكتبوه اكثر بالبيرسونال ستيتمنت. لما انت يعني، لانه بالبيرسونال ستيتمنت انت بتكون عم تشرح قصه حياتك وشو اللي خلاك توصل لتدرس طب. فبينج ا فيرست جنريشن دكتور، هاي شغلات عاده اكثر بتكون لائقه للبيرسونال ستيتمنت من السي في. نادر ما اشوف انه حدا بكتب، ما لها محل عن جد بالسي في انه تكتب فيرست جنريشن، بس بالبيرسونال ستيتمنت يعني it can be part of your story. بالنسبه لساعات التدريب للصيدله، يعني any type of work experience، بالذات 500 ساعة as a صيدلاني, all those things are actually really great experiences, who I think will help you become a better doctor as well, because you understand what it's like being on the pharmacy side. But again, it's most important to describe ايش انت استفدت وايش تعلمت من هاي الاكسبيرينس لما تعمل الطلب على الريزيدنسي. فاكيد يعني انا بالنسبه لي بعتبر انه هذا الشيء it would be a nice thing to include.
شكرا دكتور. عمار تفضل.
يعطيك العافية دكتور. بدي أسألك، لو أنا مثلا بدي أقدم بالماتش على internal medicine programs، بس كان عندي مثلا بخانة الريسيرش مثلا كيس ستاديز أو كيس ريبورتس بتخص السيرجري، مثلا نيورو سيرجري أو أوبسالمولوجي، هل هذا إشي عادي أو يعتبر ريد فلاج؟
لا بالمرة. أنا وعشان يعني أحكي لك إنه بالمرة مش ريد فلاج. أنا أول روتيشن اشتغلت فيها، أول روتيشن داومت فيها لما كنت طالب طب كلينيكال جنرال سيرجري، وزي معظم طلاب الطب كنت كثير متحمس على السيرجري واداوم بالمستشفى واشوف مرضى وهيك. فشعرت لوهله انه ممكن انه انا اكمل جنرال سيرجري. فصدف انه صار في opportunity اشتغل ريسيرش جنرال سيرجري، فطبعا انا يعني وافقت واشتركت بهذا الريسيرش. فصار عندي publication جنرال سيرجري وكثير واضح انه هي جنرال سيرجري. بس وبعدين طبعا داومت internal medicine وكارديولوجي، واكتشفت انه انا يعني ميولي اكثر للانترنال ميديسن، فغيرت وصار الطلب بالنسبه لي انه اقدم internal medicine. بس برضه لهلا موجودين هدول الاكسبيرينسز على السي في تبعي، ولما اي حدا بيسالني عنهم هم كانوا systematic reviews و meta analysis. again بشرح انه كيف انه these were my first experiences in medicine. I thought I wanted to do surgery and I immediately said yes to participating in those experiences. As I started realizing that I was interested more in internal medicine, I still wanted to complete my projects that I had agreed to do. فأجن هيك أنت بتبين إنه أنت مش من النوع اللي خلص بتبطل مهتم، إنه أنت عندك dedication تكمل الإشي اللي أنت بلشته. وبرضه بحكي عن الأشياء اللي أنا تعلمتها من هاي الإكسبيرينس. I learned how to do a systematic review. I learned how to do a meta-analysis. وهذا الإشي فادني بprojects لبعدين. فأبداً مش red flag as long as you can، as long as أنت عارف إنه ممكن تنسأل عنها. بس لما تنسأل عنها المهم إنه أنت كيف أنت بتجاوب عن هذا الإشي. انه تركز على ايش انت استفدت من هذه المعلومه، وابدا مش عيب انه انت يكون تفكر انه عندك ميول بشيء ثاني وتغير رايك، لانه اغلبيه الناس هيك بيصير معها.
تمام دكتور، شكرا لك.